What's the new poor? Have you heard of this term? It refers to people who have cars, houses, and look sharp on the outside, but hardly have any savings. They carry smartphones worth thousands, but their digital wallets barely hit four figures. They drive cars worth hundreds of thousands, yet struggle to put in just 200 yuan for gas. Sure, they live in homes worth 2 million, but the mortgage costs way more than the rent would. They're not poor exactly, since they might even own a business, but they certainly aren't rich either. Nowadays, it's almost like anyone with a little ambition is in debt. Early mornings, late nights, I doubt they'll get rich. The old concept of poverty was about lacking basic clothing or food. Society has progressed, and now you can't even tell who's struggling financially.
In recent years, Chinese social media has coined a new term, the new poor. These people own property and cars and dress well but live paycheck to paycheck, often buried in debt. As China's economy worsens and housing prices continue to drop, these new poor are popping up in cities all over, especially in places like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen. Can you tell where I live from looking at this area? Let me show you. Tall buildings, bustling streets below. That's right, I'm what they now call a new poor. Like polished shells, we look good on the outside, but inside it's all empty. The old poor couldn't afford a tiled roof or a bike. They were barely clothed and barely fed. But the new poor, you'd never know. Wearing the same brands, with property and cars in the city, and our social media full of fancy food and scenic views, we look impressive. But the reality? Empty pockets, no fun, no cash, empty bank accounts. A 6-digit password secures a 2-digit balance. Assets, but no savings. Just a pile of debt. Every payday, once we cover loans, it's back to zero. We get about 10 days of ease each month. The rest is all repayment dates looming. It's so exhausting. So, ladies, don't envy anyone else's life. Everyone has struggles. It's just that you don't see the mess behind the scenes. In theory, if you can afford a home and a car in a major city, you would think you're doing well. But that's not the reality here. Housing prices are so high in cities that most people buy homes and cars on loans, pouring all their income into mortgage and car payments. With China's economy declining, many have lost jobs or faced unstable income, making life under debt more grueling. They don't dare to have extra expenses or health issues. These are the new poor of the city. They work non-stop, barely keeping up. Any disruption in income and they could lose it all. The house, the car, years of effort down the drain. These new poor have less security than rural folks, who at least have land and can grow food. But in the city, everything costs money. Rent, utilities, transport, social obligations, open your eyes and it's just more repayments and expenses. They push through every day, exhausted by the chase for survival. Lose their income and the city will show them the door without hesitation. Now let's hear from someone who's lived in Shenzhen for 20 years and is a prime example of this new poor. Here's his story.
Let's talk about what it's really like for those of us with a house in Shenzhen. Many people think owning property here means you've made it. Let me tell you how tough things are for people like me. I came to Shenzhen in 2006, nearly 20 years ago, and it's been a hard journey. My wife and I married in 2012, when we put all our savings together. Our parents even helped us with a down payment. Back then, housing prices in Shenzhen weren't as crazy, and we managed to buy a place, paying over 10,000 yuan per square meter, with a 30-year mortgage costing over 7,000 yuan a month. At first, it wasn't so bad. With both our salaries, we could cover living expenses and still save a bit. Those were good years. Then my wife got pregnant, and since my parents weren't well enough to help, she had to quit her job to take care of the baby. That's when all the pressure shifted to me.
This was just the start. Having a child and a single income was tough. But he had a stable job, and the company was doing well, so he managed. But that didn't last. The pandemic hit, and the strict lockdowns from the government made things even harder. The company's business dropped, and his income took a huge hit. The weight of the mortgage became overwhelming.
Since the pandemic started, I can't remember the last time we had a good day. I don't even know how we managed to get through. During the pandemic, the company barely had any business. My paycheck only covered basic expenses, and sometimes we had to dig into our savings. In 2020, my mother fell ill and passed away. The funeral costs added even more strain. By the time the pandemic ended, We used up all our savings.
He had hoped things would improve after the pandemic, but last year was tough. His salary, just about $10,000 a month, barely covered their mortgage, their child's tuition, and daily expenses. Worse, the company started laying people off. He thought as a core member that he'd be safe, but he was wrong. He considered starting his own business, but every friend who tried is now drowning in debt. Some even had to mortgage their homes, ending up even worse than him. Now he's almost out of options, and staying in Shenzhen feels impossible.
I've thought about selling the house and moving back to my hometown to start fresh. But if I sell, what about my child's schooling? Plus, my wife wouldn't agree to it. Women often feel deeply attached to the home. I could leave, but selling the house would feel like tearing the family apart. If we hadn't aimed so high back then and had just built a house in the countryside, letting the child attend school locally, we wouldn't be in this helpless situation now. After going in circles, I realized I miss the quiet country road most of all. But it's too late to go back now.
This man's story is typical of many unemployed middle-aged people in big cities today. These individuals are known as the slipping middle class, the backbone of the new urban poor. Typically well-educated and hardworking, they often come from fields like finance and technology. During the boom years of China's rapid economic growth, their well-paying jobs allowed them to buy houses and cars. But a sudden pandemic threw their lives into disarray. The government's strict lockdowns nearly froze the economy, causing income to plummet while mortgages and car loans still needed payment every month. Many people hoped things would improve after the pandemic, only to find that the economy was weaker than ever. Previously, although income was dropping, they still had jobs and hopes for the future. Now, layoffs and pay cuts are looming for every former elite, especially those over 35, whose degrees seem devalued and who are increasingly the target of layoffs due to age and higher salaries. Unemployment in middle age has pushed them towards a steep decline, and the good days seem gone forever. To make things worse, the real estate market has slumped in recent years. Housing prices in top cities have fallen by nearly 30%, and in other areas, the decline has reached over 50%. Those who bought property at high prices now face a significant loss in asset value. Many new poor who try to sell find that they can't even cover their remaining mortgage. If they default, the bank auctions the property, hurting their credit and leaving them homeless. Take Kathy, a woman in her 30s in Shanghai who's part of this new poor. After 9 years of working in Shanghai, she finally bought a house with a loan, only to see the value plummet by 32%, leaving her virtually impoverished overnight and at risk of defaulting on her mortgage. Kathy was a top student from a young age, graduating from a prestigious 211 university and even earning a master's degree. After graduation, like many others, she was determined to make it in a big city like Shanghai. She moved from Wuhan to Shanghai with just a few thousand yuan in her pocket. Luckily, she landed a job at a high-tech company, becoming part of the high-income elite. She worked in the heart of Shanghai's Lujiazui financial district, where the city's most iconic skyscrapers stand. With her trendy and confident look, Kathy seemed like the very image of success that people back in her small hometown admired. However, the city's high housing prices and fierce rental market proved challenging. Over the years, she rented from various places across Shanghai, even getting scammed by a sub-landlord. It was exhausting, and she swore she'd one day own her own place. When her savings grew, Kathy began house hunting and finally purchased an old apartment in Sijing town right before the pandemic. During Shanghai's lockdowns, she spent months alone in her apartment, grateful she had her own space. She felt proud, sipping coffee with friends at upscale spots on the Bund, discussing the latest trends with the Huangpu River flowing beneath them. For a while, she felt Shanghai had truly welcomed her. But in recent years, Shanghai's housing market took a dramatic turn, with Sijing's neighborhood experiencing the sharpest decline, averaging a 32% drop. Just last August, prices in that area had fallen drastically from the peak 2 years prior. Yet, her biggest worry now isn't the housing price drop, but the fact that her employment contract wasn't renewed 6 months ago. Despite a severance package, she couldn't find a job that matched her previous income. She's living frugally, but as each mortgage payment approaches, and with credit cards maxed out, despair has set in. Kathy tried everything to avoid defaulting on her mortgage, even pleading with bank officials for any inside deal or favor, only to be met with subtle mockery. She's thought about giving up and returning to her hometown, but she dreads the judgment from her family and friends. She's devised a plan for her future while job hunting. Her first option is marriage. She currently has a suitor she's not particularly fond of, but if they marry, he could help with the mortgage. Her second option is to sell the house and move back to her hometown, perhaps marrying someone local. But after calculating the expenses, including purchase costs, renovations, and interest payments, selling now would mean losing everything she's worked for the past 9 years. Her third option is to stay in Shanghai, regardless of whether she defaults on the house payments, and just tough it out. Sometimes she wonders, she's tried so hard, so why is she still in this situation, penniless with nothing but a house that feels like a bottomless pit? Looking back, she feels like it's all a cruel irony. She thought buying a house would make her a true Shanghainese, but it's turned into a money-draining trap, taking all her savings and tying her future to debt. What was once a proud achievement has left her struggling in the very city where she thought she'd finally belong. Shaolong's story has parallels with Kathy's, though the details are different. Both end up in similar predicaments. After graduating in 2017, Shaolong began working at a trust company in Guangzhou's Luogang area, earning a solid salary of 20,000 yuan per month. He watched as the prices in the Luogang Vanke Donghui city development keep rising, reaching 21,000 yuan per square meter by May 2018. At that time, he was young, not thinking about marriage or buying property. But by 2019, he met his girlfriend at work, and they moved in together in a small rental in the Shangshui area. By the end of 2020, they were planning to marry. However, his girlfriend's mother insisted that he buy a house in Guangzhou before they registered for marriage. It was during this time that a favorable housing policy in Huangpu district attracted speculators from Shenzhen, pushing property prices even higher. Shaolong watched others making huge profits from their investments, and combined with pressure from his future mother-in-law, he decided to buy. In February 2021, he scraped together his parents' savings and purchased a 99-square-meter, three-bedroom apartment in Vanke Donghui City for 4.7 million yuan, with a monthly mortgage of 20,000 yuan. Shortly after, he even bought a Lexus. At their wedding, which was held in a large hotel, his relatives from the countryside saw the skyscrapers of Luogang and were full of praise, admiring him from buying property in the big city. Shaolong felt proud, with his relatives looking up to him, seeing him as the wealthiest in their village. But soon after buying the house, Shaolong's financial troubles began. In 2022, his company faced a major crisis, leading to a pay cut that slashed his salary to just 10,000 yuan, half of what it once was. His monthly mortgage still demanded 20,000, so the remaining half had to come from his wife's entire salary. But they still had to cover basic living expenses, utilities, property fees, and food. To make ends meet, he began asking his parents for 5,000 yuan each month. His father, a construction worker, didn't earn much, but to support his son, his parents cut back on their own expenses to send him money. Did this resolve their situation? Unfortunately not. By 2024, Guangzhou's property market had taken a nosedive, and the prices in Luogang plummeted. Similar apartments to Shaolong's dropped to 25,000 yuan per square meter, down from the 47,000 he'd paid. For his family, this was a devastating blow. In total, Shaolong's apartment lost 2.22 million yuan in value. At his current salary of 10,000 yuan a month, it would take him 18 years without any expenses to make up for the loss. It's beyond staggering. Shaolong feels that he's simply working for the bank, trapped in a seemingly endless cycle of debt. Now, Shaolong and his wife live as frugally as possible, cutting expenses wherever they can. Ironically, his mother-in-law's demand for them to buy a house has burdened her daughter with a 30-year mortgage. To earn extra income, Shaolong works part-time, earning about 200 yuan a day. On the surface, he has a house and car, but underneath, he's in dire straits, a classic example of the new poor. What saddens him the most is the emptiness he feels. He wonders, what's the point of life? Was all his youth and effort worth it? If he hadn't bought the house, he could have lived a happy life. Now the house has drained everything he has, chaining him to 30 years of debt, turning his hard-earned money into a prison. Next, we have a man in Shenzhen who bought a home thinking it would help him find a wife and build a good life. But the heavy mortgage means he works overtime constantly, leaving him with neither time nor the money for a relationship.
What's life like for someone with a house in Shenzhen? Well, it's 11:30 p.m. and I just got off work. My monthly salary is around 20,000 yuan, but I pay 15,000 yuan towards my mortgage. Another 2,000 yuan goes to my mom for her living expenses, so I'm left with around 3,000 yuan for everything else. That covers my meals, transportation, phone bill, and toiletries. I can't even order takeout. I always cook at home. When I don't have time, it's instant noodles or bread. Back home, everyone my age is already married, but I have no time to date. I'm living penny to penny. Since buying this house, I haven't set foot in a supermarket or bought new clothes. I haven't seen my friends in ages. This concrete box has locked down my next 30 years. I can't quit my job, and I can't afford to get sick. It feels like I sold the next 3 decades to the bank just for a place to live. My relatives back home look down on me. I didn't buy this house for status. I just wanted to prove myself. But now, I'm barely holding on. Do you really think marriage should require owning a house? Is it truly worth it?
Some people online commented, saying he had acted on impulse to show off. They say people think he's living well because he bought a home in Shenzhen, but only he knows the struggle. Others suggest he should stop paying, at least to regain control over his life. They say if he keeps paying, he'll have a life worse than death. From these stories, it's clear that many of the new poor in big cities find themselves in this situation due to buying property. Most bought homes at peak prices, only to watch them lose value as the economy declined, with layoffs and pay cuts adding to the strain. Unfortunately, China's economy shows no signs of improvement, and in coming years, this group of new poor is expected to grow. Many once envied middle-class families are no longer truly living, they're merely surviving in the gaps between debt and dwindling income.